Ladies and gentlemen, imagine a world where the icy silence of Alaska becomes the stage upon which the balance of global power tilts. A frozen landscape, rugged and untamed, suddenly hosts voices that carry the weight of nations. What unfolded there was not merely a meeting. It was a tremor that echoed across continents, shaking the world and lifting India into a place of renewed strength. In Alaska, where the frozen winds sweep endlessly across a landscape carved by time itself, something remarkable unfolded. The very stage of nature became a theater of nations. Imagine glaciers towering like ancient guardians, their jagged edges glistening in the faint northern light, as if they had been patiently waiting for humanity to play out its next act of destiny. Beneath that sky of eternal silence, the voices of powerful nations clashed. Their words were heavy, deliberate, carrying with them the weight of centuries of rivalry, distrust, and ambition. And in that charged atmosphere, amidst the crunch of snow and the piercing cold, the presence of India began to reveal itself, not in noise or chaos, but in quiet, steady strength. For centuries, Alaska has stood as a place symbolic of raw endurance. Only those who are resilient, only those who can withstand isolation and extreme climates truly thrive there. It is fitting then that this location became the backdrop for one of the most defining moments in international dialogue. The world watched as leaders confronted one another, their debates as sharp as the icy winds, their strategies as unpredictable as a snowstorm sweeping over the tundra. But as the storm brewed, there stood India like a mountain rising above the mist, unshaken, unbroken, and unyielding. What made this moment extraordinary was not merely the clash of superpowers, but the recognition that equilibrium was required, that amidst the aggression there needed to be stability. It was here that India's stature began to grow, not through confrontation, but through endurance. Just as glaciers do not shout as they reshape valleys, but still alter the earth forever, India did not come to dominate the stage with noise, but with quiet significance. The symbolism was profound. Where two forces met in collision, India appeared as the third presence, the steady rock, offering balance without bending to either side. The beauty of this lies in the fact that India's rise in this setting was not prearranged, not scripted, but organic, born out of necessity. In the frigid air, where every sound seemed amplified, India's voice did not echo in aggression, but resonated in composure. That composure, that calm assurance, spoke louder than the accusations thrown back and forth between others. It was as if the natural landscape itself reflected India's role, unchanging mountains against a turbulent sky, rivers flowing steadily even as storms raged above them. The Alaska meeting was not simply political. It was symbolic of the eternal struggle between conflict and cooperation. Just as ecosystems survive by finding balance between predator and prey, growth and decay, so too must nations survive by finding balance between rivalry and partnership. And when balance was needed most, the world's gaze turned toward India. In that frozen wilderness, nations realized that India was no longer just an observer of history, it was becoming a maker of it. Its presence promised continuity, its strength suggested stability, and its wisdom pointed to a new path. India's role in this moment was like the earth beneath the snow, often unseen but carrying everything above it. Without the firm foundation, the clash of giants might have shaken the entire world into chaos. But India's quiet stability offered a counterweight, a sense of gravity pulling the narrative back to equilibrium. The mountains of Alaska have withstood millennia of storms. Glaciers have endured countless cycles of melting and freezing. And in this same spirit of resilience, India too withstood the storm of words, unshaken by the drama unfolding around it, patient and enduring, prepared to rise higher than before.
Like a river that suddenly shifts its course, carrying with it fertile soil and reshaping the land it touches, the Alaska meeting redirected the flow of global influence in ways few could have anticipated. The gathering, framed against the stark cold of the Arctic, did more than stage confrontation. It revealed a profound truth. Power is never static. It moves like currents, unpredictable and unstoppable. While the world expected dominance from the familiar giants, what emerged was the realization that influence was seeking a new vessel, a new center of gravity, and that vessel was India.
The clash in Alaska was fierce, with voices raised and tempers flaring, each nation trying to assert its dominance, much like two storms colliding in the sky. But storms, for all their ferocity, eventually fade, while rivers continue to flow, nourishing the earth long after the thunder has gone silent. India, in this unfolding drama, represented that river. Its presence was not explosive, not defined by noise, but by constancy. When two powers locked horns in icy air, the rest of the world instinctively searched for balance, for a presence that could restore order to a destabilized atmosphere. And in that search, their eyes fell on India, a nation vast in scope, resilient in spirit, and steady in its forward march. The imagery is striking. Forests that endure fire and grow back stronger, deserts that withstand centuries of heat yet harbor life, oceans that remain calm beneath surface storms. India embodied all of these in Alaska, not by projecting aggression, but by offering something the world desperately needed: reliability. It was as if the nations gathered suddenly remembered that beyond confrontation, survival depends on trust, and trust can only be placed in those who endure. India's endurance, tested through decades of challenges, became its greatest source of attraction. What made this shift so profound was that it was not imposed but invited. Other nations, sensing the instability in the confrontation, naturally gravitated toward India. As trees bend toward sunlight, they saw a country that had managed to balance modern ambition with ancient wisdom, a country that had grown not by trampling others, but by adapting and evolving, like ecosystems that find ways to coexist rather than destroy. The Alaska meeting was therefore less about who shouted the loudest and more about who could stand as a sanctuary of stability when others faltered. This was the moment when India transitioned from being seen merely as a participant to becoming a pillar. A pillar holds weight, carries pressure, and provides support when others cannot stand on their own. The meeting revealed that India was no longer simply reacting to global events, but actively shaping them, not with overwhelming force, but with the gravity of presence, the kind of presence that cannot be ignored. Just as the Earth's magnetic field is invisible yet vital, India's influence was felt even in silence, pulling others toward it in the search for balance. The symbolic shift of global gravity was clear. Power no longer flowed exclusively between the traditional centers of dominance. Instead, it began to spread, seeking resilience, stability, and vision, like rivers carving new valleys. This shift was subtle, but irreversible. India was recognized not for temporary gestures, but for being a foundation that others could lean on when storms erupted. And from that recognition, a new chapter of global equilibrium quietly began to unfold. With India at its center, not as a shadow of others, but as a force that redirected the current of history itself. The clash of words in Alaska was loud, carrying across microphones and media channels with the force of storms crashing against cliffs. Yet behind that spectacle there was something far more subtle, something less visible but no less powerful. While the giants exchanged accusations, gestures, and challenges, India chose a different path. It did not join the cacophony, nor did it try to overshadow the thunder with thunder of its own. Instead, its strategy moved in silence, much like the roots of a great tree beneath the soil, hidden, unspoken, yet essential to life above. True power does not always announce itself, and India's presence in this moment was a reminder that strategy, when built on patience and vision, can outlast the loudest of confrontations. In that frozen arena, where words cut like shards of ice, India's approach was one of listening. To listen is not weakness. It is strength. It is the strength of oceans that absorb storms and still remain, while others rush to outshout one another. India absorbed, observed, and calculated, understanding that the world does not remember the noisiest voices, but the ones that leave the deepest marks. Just as a glacier shapes mountains over centuries without ever making a sound, India's quiet positioning during the Alaska meeting began to shape global perceptions, creating a foundation more enduring than fiery words could ever achieve. Strategy, when silent, has the unique ability to move beneath notice, to flow beneath the surface until it emerges unstoppable. India's decision to refrain from aggression, to act with composure rather than conflict, revealed that power is not a single moment of noise, but a series of deliberate actions that accumulate like layers of ice, each one building upon the last until it becomes immovable. In the theater of global politics, silence is often mistaken for absence, but in truth, it can be the most formidable presence. India's silence in Alaska was not emptiness. It was concentration, a gathering of strength that others could not easily perceive. This silent strength resonated far beyond the meeting itself. Nations watching from afar saw not just the shouting of rivals, but the steadiness of India, and that steadiness began to inspire trust. For in a world where alliances shift like snowdrifts in the wind, what is needed most is not more shouting, but a reliable anchor, a force that does not sway every time the storm changes direction. India, through its quiet strategy, showed that it could be that anchor, offering something rare, predictability amidst chaos. It did not compete to dominate the stage. Instead, it became the stage upon which others performed, unshaken and unmoved. Consider how nature rewards patience. Seeds buried deep in frozen ground wait silently until the right moment to sprout, their potential hidden but never absent. Rivers, flowing steadily and calmly, carve canyons that storms cannot. India's strategy mirrored this truth. By avoiding the noise and waiting for the right moment, it positioned itself where the world needed it most, not by force, but by inevitability. Other nations, fatigued by endless confrontations, began to recognize this. They saw in India a partner not driven by impulse, but by purpose, not reacting to every provocation, but charting a path that looked beyond the present storm. In that way, India's silent strength became louder than any speech, louder than any confrontation. It was the kind of strength that operates in shadows but defines the landscape, like the unseen currents of the ocean that steer the ships above without ever being seen. Alaska reminded the world that power is not always in the roar of voices, but in the quiet presence that endures after the noise has faded. And in that presence, India revealed its strategy, not to be the loudest, but to be the most lasting. The Alaska meeting was not just a diplomatic confrontation. It was a mirror held up to the world, reflecting not only the divisions between great powers, but also the opportunities for those willing to step into a greater role. Amidst the icy winds and hard words, something awakened within India. For too long, global politics had been viewed as a contest of size, weapons, and wealth. But in that frozen chamber, it became clear that true power is not limited to arsenals or economies. It is found in confidence. Confidence is the invisible force that transforms a nation from participant to leader, from observer to shaper of destiny, and Alaska gave India the chance to see its own reflection in that light. For decades, India had been recognized as a vast democracy, a growing market, a culture with deep roots, but often still spoken of in terms of potential rather than presence. Yet in Alaska, the noise of rivalry stripped away illusions. The world did not need another nation shouting across icy waters. It needed a steady voice, a presence that radiated assurance, and in that moment, India began to realize that it belonged not on the sidelines, but at the very center where decisions that shape the world are made. This realization was not born of arrogance, but of awakening, a recognition that confidence itself could be the currency of influence. Confidence does not shout. It does not demand constant attention. It radiates quietly, like sunlight that falls evenly on all it touches, warming without burning. India's growing confidence was not rooted in fleeting moments, but in centuries of resilience, in decades of progress, in the ability to endure adversity and still rise stronger. That confidence was not a performance staged for Alaska. It was the natural outgrowth of a nation that had long prepared itself to claim its rightful space. It was the recognition that India's voice was not just important, it was indispensable. The Alaska confrontation amplified this awakening. Nations that once dismissed India as secondary began to see the weight it carried simply by remaining composed. When rivals locked themselves in verbal duels, India's calm presence reminded others of something essential. Leadership is not always about who speaks the most forcefully, but about who others are willing to follow when the shouting ends. The quiet confidence that India radiated became more powerful than declarations of dominance because it suggested permanence, a strength not shaken by theatrics. This awakening was also internal. India itself began to shed the remnants of hesitation that had sometimes held it back on the global stage. Confidence is not given. It is claimed by standing firm in Alaska, not bending to the pressure of louder voices. India declared to itself as much as to others that it was ready for greater responsibility. That sense of belonging at the table where the future is decided marked a turning point. It was no longer about asking for recognition. It was about embodying it. Confidence turned India from a nation with potential into a nation of presence, and presence is what commands respect. Like a bird that suddenly discovers its wings are strong enough to soar higher than it ever dared, India recognized in Alaska that the world would no longer ignore its flight. Confidence became the wind beneath those wings, propelling it beyond limitation, beyond hesitation, into a realm where it could no longer be sidelined. And in the cold silence of that meeting, amidst the clash of powers, a quiet but irreversible truth emerged. India had found its voice, and that voice carried the resonance of a rising power that others could not afford to overlook. From the frozen silence of Alaska there emerged not just confrontation but revelation. In that distant land of endless snowfields and towering ice, the world was reminded that history is not written only by conflict but also by the responsibilities that follow it. When the heated exchanges between great powers subsided, when the echoes of argument lingered in the cold air, what remained was a question larger than any dispute: who will guide the future when the world trembles? Out of that question, India's role began to shine with a clarity that could not be ignored. It was not the power of intimidation that brought this light, but the dawn of responsibility, a responsibility that came from the sheer weight of being trusted, of being looked to when stability was needed. The significance of this moment was not in loud declarations, but in subtle shifts. Nations present and nations watching understood that power without purpose is dangerous, and dominance without responsibility is fragile. India, with its billions of voices, its rich traditions, and its growing influence, stood out as a force willing to carry responsibility rather than chase dominance. It was like the first light of the sun scattering across snow-covered mountains, not blinding, not harsh, but guiding and steady, revealing a path forward that others could follow. The Alaska meeting underscored that the age of single-handed dominance was fading, and the age of shared responsibility was dawning, and in that dawn India's role became central. This new dawn was not gifted, it was earned. For decades, India had endured challenges, from internal struggles to external pressures, from economic hardship to political isolation, yet through all of it there was a spirit that refused to break. That spirit, tested and tempered, became the foundation upon which responsibility could be placed. Responsibility cannot be carried by those who have not known resilience, and it cannot be trusted to those who lack vision. India's rise from hardship to opportunity became proof that it was not only capable of bearing this new role, but destined for it. Just as the snow on Alaskan peaks hides the bedrock beneath, the world had often overlooked the depth of India's strength, but the meeting revealed it in full clarity. The world does not seek leaders only in strength, but in wisdom, and India carries centuries of wisdom woven into its fabric. This wisdom teaches that responsibility is not a burden, but a calling, not a weight that bends the back, but a light that guides the path. In Alaska, when others chose to confront, India chose to represent balance. In that choice lay the essence of responsibility, the courage to rise above personal gain and offer something greater to the collective. The responsibility India assumed was not to dominate, but to harmonize, not to dictate, but to bridge, and that is why its power was amplified in the eyes of the world. Like dawn breaking after the longest night, this moment symbolized renewal. The light of responsibility spread outward from India's presence, giving hope that the tremors of Alaska would not end in division, but in a rebalancing of global order. Nations found in India not only a strong partner, but a guiding light, one that could navigate uncertainty without losing direction. The dawn of responsibility is not fleeting, for once it rises, it cannot be reversed. It continues to expand, touching everything in its reach, and in Alaska, the world saw that India's light had begun to stretch across horizons. It had never before illuminated, so yes, the Alaska meeting shook the world. But more importantly, it awakened within India its destiny to stand not as a shadow of others, but as a beacon of its own. In every challenge, nature reminds us, the strongest are not always the loudest, but those who endure, adapt and rise. And today, India rises, not because of Alaska alone, but because history itself has chosen this moment for its power to shine.